Thanks very much to all of you for being with us on the France 24 debate. First of all, Max Keiser, there have been no fewer than 7 boss-nappings since March in France. The number seems staggering.
Right. I only wish my American compatriots would be so bold and that the heads of GM, Chrysler, and Ford were kidnapped, and J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs, because these guys deserve to be kidnapped. The people are rising up because they're tired of having their economies destroyed by what I call the divine right of hedge funds. Back in 1649, there was a loss of the divine right of kings in Britain with the deposition of Charles I, I believe it was. Now, suddenly we have the divine right of hedge funds. They think of themselves completely above the law, and now the people are doing, the only thing they have a resort to do is to rise up, take matters into their own hands, and game on.
Oliver? Max Keiser, there is real anger out there, and as he said very clearly, there is a sense that there is no other way of expressing it now. Surely this is something the government is going to have to take on.
Well, back to the point of regulation that was made, whether we need more regulation or less regulation, we have plenty of regulation. The problem is that nobody's obeying the regulations. Nobody's obeying the law. Hank Paulson is now up for criminal indictment for having squandered those TARP funds in a criminal syndicate along with his banking buddies. So these guys are facing serious jail time. They have apparently made off with tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars of the citizens' money. Outright theft under what you could call RICO, which is anti-racketeering laws. That's why the people are upset. And there's a global insurrection against corporate occupation. I'm siding with the global insurrectionists. I think they've got a great point. And I want my face out there and let them know I'm on their side, because they're going to win this battle, because these banking oligarchs have gone too far and they're going down.
Well, the system as it was surely is still the only realistic game in town, and that once these excesses, the over-remuneration of the big bosses, the things that people are rising up against now in France, certainly, these things will be fixed. The government seems to be acting. It's limited. It's going to legislate on the question of stock options and so on. It has made some steps in the direction of union demands over the last few months. These are things that will be addressed and resolved, and in the end, we will go back to a slightly more regulated form of what we had before.
No, because the crisis has gone into the inner circle of the Federal Reserve System. So you've got Ben Bernanke, of course, who took over from Alan Greenspan, and they are supposed to be a firewall against all these excesses, but instead they're taking on trillions onto their balance sheet and they're destroying the economy. And as far as the cyclical nature of things go, revolution is cyclical as well. And we're going to see that cycle reassert itself. So you've got the Federal Reserve Bank now in cahoots with commercial banks, just like you saw in Argentina in the 2001 period. You know, the Argentinian crisis, you had politics and central bankers colluding to abscond with the nation's wealth. The trucks were literally rolling out of town, and the people are left with absolutely nothing. And this is coming to America and coming to Western Europe, and the people sense it. That's why they're angry. But the problem is they're not angry enough. If they want to preserve any of their wealth, they need to get active now.
Max Keiser, whether you think that's significant. Does it explain, do you think, in a sense, the fact that in order to be heard, trade unions in France, because of their lower membership, need to make their points in a bolder way?
Well, you know, comparing it to the U.S., for example, the U.S. really has no union representation whatsoever. You know, the unions were destroyed, starting with Reagan, and you've got no ability to push back at all. I think the unions here in Europe and in France at least give workers a sense of solidarity and give them a sense that they have some stake in the economy. And let's face it, the education standards in Europe are a lot higher than in Britain or the U.S., because in Britain and the U.S., the education institutions have been privatized and turned into banking vehicles, and the education standards, test standards, and IQs have dropped in those two countries. And in France, people are still intelligent enough to protect their own self-interest. And so when they see what's going on, they see that they're having their wealth confiscated by a bunch of corrupt oligarch bankers, they get angry. And of course, the tradition of uprising in this country, thank God, is strong, and they reach for the pitchforks, and God bless them.
And we thought G7 was perhaps dead, and we're talking G20, G7 days over, and right now they're talking green shoots there. Do you see those greens?
No, of course not. They're lying. The G7 is basically just a front for the banking oligarchs The banking oligarchs have taken the global economy into the ditch. And I said on your show 2 weeks ago that China would be doubling their gold bullion position. And sure enough, the news reported this past week is that China has almost doubled their gold bullion position because China wants to have the world reserve currency. They don't want the U.S. dollar to be the world reserve currency. The U.S. dollar will no longer be the world reserve currency in another 18 months after Tim Geithner and Ben Bernanke are finished destroying the U.S. economy. And we're all Chinese now.
So many heads of states together so many times, S&P's solution seems very elusive.
The problem number one is the notion that you need to clean out the banks first. Just because the banks are holding the globe hostage and extorting trillions of dollars out of the citizens of the U.S. and Britain to cover their pension payments and their bonus payments and their salary payments doesn't mean it's a good idea. The federal government could very easily just wipe away all the mortgage debt and all the credit card debt, and the economy would be reset basically to where it was 3 years ago, and you'd actually have a growth in the economy. But they don't do that because it would mean that the interest rates might have to be raised to accommodate growth, and bankers don't make as much money when interest rates are going up as they do when interest rates are going down. So it's the bankers, of course, are holding the system hostage. And I've made the comparison with the U.S. bankers to the attackers of 9/11. And that comparison holds up today. These are financial terrorists. And they're doing incredible damage to the U.S. economy. And the U.S. citizens, by not acting more proactively, are going to be carried out on a stretcher. Their economy is going to be completely eviscerated by the rise of other currencies other than the U.S. dollar, principally the Chinese yuan. So anyone living in the U.S., they would do a service to themselves to get out.
Report and your own speculations all the way through 2009-10.
IMF is just going to be the latest receptacle for a multi-trillion dollar Ponzi scheme, flotation and reflotation of credit default swaps and collateralized debt obligations and asset-backed securities. They're just going to repackage them from the Federal Reserve Bank and the banks on Wall Street. Then they're going to stick them on the IMF's balance sheet for a couple of quarters. All the bankers will get fees. Then they'll say, oh my God, there's a huge debt. We need more stimulus. Give us more money. They'll put a gun to the head of the community and they'll say, give us more money. Then they'll park the debts onto some other bank's assets. It's a complete sham. And let's get back to the point about the false dichotomy between stimulus versus regulation. How about if the bankers obey the current regulation and laws? Hank Paulson is now up for criminal indictment for coercing Bank of America to buy Merrill Lynch, knowing that Merrill Lynch had huge losses undisclosed. That's securities fraud. Hank Paulson should be in jail right now. The guy's committed massive tyranny. The shareholders are screwed. The American economy is completely shellacked. And now the global economy is suffering. Hank Paulson is a tyrant. He should be in jail. Him and Jim Cramer from CNBC. Those two guys are running the global economy into the ditch. They should both be swinging from the yardarm.